Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I know it's been a while, so I'm gonna have to introduce myself again. So, if you guys are new here, my name is Sean and I am a current gap year student that graduated from Rutgers back in 2022. Well, technically, right now, the application cycle has wrapped up. Yes, this past year I've been applying to medical schools, so that's why I've been sort of inactive a little bit. But I was able to show you guys one interview process I went through. But anyway, yes, I applied over this past year, and so since the application cycle is coming to a close now, I want to be able to start a mini series where I give you guys advice on primaries, secondaries, interviews, and pretty much every step-by-step process to be a successful applicant. So I hope this series helps you, and if it does, then hopefully you guys can share it with other people who are perhaps applying this cycle or even applying future cycles. Without further ado, let's begin. So today we're going to be talking about the primary section of the application process. And before I give you guys the tips for the primary section, I want to be as transparent as possible. So this past cycle I applied to both MD and DO schools, and I applied to around 35 schools. Out of those 35 schools, I received around, I want to say 8 to 9 interview advice, where I was able to secure 2 acceptances that were DO schools, and I was put on the wait list for 3 other MD schools, while being also on the wait list for 1 other DO school. And basically the stats that I came in with was a 3.7 regular GPA and a 3.75 science GPA with a low 500 MCAT score. And with this MCAT score, I wasn't the proudest of it because I felt like I could have done a much better job. But after taking it a few times, I felt like I need to just shoot my shot, as you know, I didn't really want to waste my time any further. And that is a bit controversial because people will say, oh, you should, keep taking it, or you should, try to achieve that top score. But at the same time, for me, my goal is to just be a physician, regardless whether it's a MD or DO school. So I felt like once I got at least an okay score, I felt like that was the best for me to apply. But I know other people have different opinions, so I'm not going to go too far into that discussion. Now, with that being said, I'm going to start with the first tip of the video. Now, my first tip is definitely preparation. Preparation. I think preparation should be happening before May, even before you start applying, because usually the application cycle opens around May, and you want to be able to already start preparing probably the year prior you apply. For example, this means working on extracurriculars at the start of college and throughout college, basically being able to keep up with different activities. And with activities, whenever you go throughout a day of doing extracurriculars, whether it's a clinical experience, non-clinical experience, or teaching, or really any leadership roles you have, you want to be able to document the experience you had. And when you document the experience, you wanted to be able to not only show the responsibilities there throughout that day, but also show less of what you learned and how that perhaps can help you in the future in medical school and as a physician. And when you do this each day or every single time you're in this experience, this is going to really help you with writing applications. So I would highly recommend you guys to journal as you go throughout these activities, so that it can help you a lot more. In addition, with preparation, you want to be able to draft your personal statement around the winter time before you apply. And the reason why you want to do this is that your personal statement is going to take a lot of revisions. It's not something you're going to get on the first try or even the second try, maybe the third try. You want to be able to go through as many revisions as possible so that you have a better crafted essay and you'll be able to tell your story better on why you want to be a physician and the experiences that led you to that decision of you want to be a physician. So you can be able to get edits from family, friends, people who are good at writing, maybe even random people. I recommend to get a different set of people so that you're able to get different perspectives and opinions on your personal statement. But remember, you don't want them to remove your style, you just want them to make recommendations and of course fix your grammar and stuff like that, so that the personal statement can show who you are, not anyone else. And preparation doesn't just go for your personal statement. This is also going to go for your work and activities. So your work activities, you want to still prep this early. Some people prep for this around March or April, which is perfectly fine because it doesn't take as long as a personal statement. But I still recommend to work on this even maybe later in the winter time, so that you're able to tell your story on these activities and why this helped you become, or this helped you in perhaps becoming a future physician or medical student. So I'll definitely try to get that started in February, and I'm going to explain to you more about how to exactly work on your work activities. But for now, just get those preparations done early. And lastly, the MCAT. Ideally, you want to be able to take the MCAT by at the latest late April, so that you can get your score back by May, when you actually need to submit your primary applications to each of those schools you're applying to. Now, some people feel like they're not ready for MCAT, which is perfectly fine. I think you should personally delay the MCAT until you're fully ready to take the test, because you only have 7 attempts in your lifetime. So you want to be able to make sure that every attempt counts, and obviously minimize the attempts as much as possible. A May test date is definitely fine, but you're just going to receive your score after you submit to school. And if you need to push back to June, that's also okay, but again, it's sort of the same situation as May, where you're not going to receive your score back in time when you submit your scores at the end of May. Now, this second tip is probably the most important tip of this entire video. If you don't take anything away from this video, please listen for the second tip. Your application should be a narrative. Now, what do I mean by a narrative? Now, a narrative is a theme that you use in the application that tells who you are. It's usually sort of a common thing that comes across in almost all your activities that you've done in college. So I'm going to give you an example of my application process. So for me, my theme was essentially service and mentorship, particularly among people of lower income. So almost all my activities pretty much went around either mentorship, service, or working in underserved areas. And the thing you want to do is, before you even start your application process, you want to be able to just reflect and think about all the activities you've done, and think about something that ties together everything that you've done. And then once you have that, you want to be able to use that to craft your personal statement, your work activities, and almost everything else in your application process, whether that's your secondaries, your primaries, and even your interview phase. The thing that you don't want to do is make your application cookie cutter. This means just checking a box. Now, I understand you need to probably get a certain amount of hours and stuff like that, but cookie cutter means that there's really no theme that really ties to activities. You're essentially doing activities just to make it throughout the application process. So I recommend to definitely think of a theme, or think of a few themes that includes the activities and that ties everything around, so that you'll be able to craft your application better. Now, my third tip is to apply as early as possible. Now, for me, I applied to both MD and DO schools. The MD's application software is AMCAS, while the DO application software is called ACOMAS. Now, for AMCAS, the verification period is much longer. It usually ranges from like around a month, maybe even 2 months. So you want to be able to apply pretty much as soon as the application actually allows you to submit applications, which is usually around the end of May. For me, I submitted 3 to 4 days after that period opened, and some people even submit the first day that application is open to submit. You definitely want to submit as soon as that application it allows you to submit. This is for AMCAS though, because the verification period is much longer. Now for COMAS, it doesn't really matter as much, because the verification period is much shorter, so you definitely have a little more time to submit it. But I still recommend that you still submit as soon as possible, so that you're sort of in the front of the line when schools come back to you for secondaries as well as interviews. And the application process is rolling admissions, which means that every single time a school interviews or even gains acceptance of someone, the amount of seats just gets lower and lower until the class is full. So ideally, the earlier you are, the better your chances are. But this doesn't mean that you want to rush your application. It's much better to submit slightly later and have a better application than submit too early and have a rush application. So I still would try to take your time, but just be mindful of the time you need to submit, and submit as soon as you can and as soon as the application is very good. Now for the MCAS, usually schools send out the secondaries around late June, early July. I would say ideally you want to have your MCAS pages submitted by that first, maybe second week of June, so that you're able to get the secondaries in time. If you submit a little bit later, you'll probably get a little bit later, and that might or might not affect your application process. But again, it's much better to submit it slightly later and have a better application than submit early and not have such or as good of an application. I would say the only way you might be able to save yourself from a late application is if you have pretty good stats, but even then it's harder. So just save yourself and try to submit it as early as possible. Alright, this fourth tip is going to be more about your personal statement, and I want to have another video that explains much depth about the personal statement. But for now, I would say a personal statement needs to be able to describe your activities and be able to tell why you want to become a physician, as well as the lesson you learned and whatever experience you put in your personal statement. Now, I think there should be a mix of personal and academic experiences, because schools want to be to see you for who you are and not just you while you're in school or while you're working. So definitely feel free to have a mix of personal and academic experiences that allow you to want to become a future physician. Now, for me, what I will do is you want to have short anecdotes of personal and academic experiences that uses descriptive language. You want to be able to feel that the reader, or you want the reader to feel that he or she can really see your journey to wanting to become a physician, and by using descriptive language they can see that. And once you do that, you want to be able to tell them the lesson you learned from the experience. I think this is the most important thing, because I think by just telling them the anecdotes, it tells you the story but doesn't really explain the reason why you want to become a physician. And so I think this part is crucial to connecting the link between the experience and the reason why you want to become a physician. So by using that scripted language, you should be able to sort of see what the lesson you learned. So I think that would be pretty easy once you actually have that end. And then from there, you want to be able to explain why this will make you a good physician. And again, this takes time and this takes revision. But a website that helped me a lot is the 15 science competencies. And I'm probably going to show like a blurb or footage. But essentially that website tells you about the skills that are needed to become a good medical student and physician. And that definitely helped me a lot in using that as not only the lesson learned, but why that can make me a good physician. I would say probably include around, 3 to 4 NSOs at most, so that you'll be able to keep it in that limit. And the limit for MCAS and ACOMAS is slightly different. I believe that the ACOMAS is slightly shorter than MCAS, so we want to keep that in mind, especially applying to both. And I'm not sure about the Texas schools, which I didn't apply to, but that might be different as well. So I'll probably put a text to the characters out loud. My next tip is going to be on the working activities, and you want to be able to explain an experience you had, where you explain the skill that you use in that particular experience, and also the sort of lesson you learned. Now you see what I keep saying here, lesson learned, lesson learned, lesson learned. Yes, it's going to be important to tell them the lesson you learned, so that again you can connect to your experience and how they can help you in the future, whether as a medical student or as a physician. Since I applied to both MCAS and ACOMAS, it's slightly different in requirements. So for MCAS, you have around 700 characters to explain an activity, and there's also meaningful experiences where you have an additional, I believe, 1,325 characters. For ACOMAS, you only have 600 characters, so it's much shorter and there's no meaningful experiences, so there's no extra characters for that or for the ACOMAS application. So the sort of format I use was, I usually try to have a hook at the start of each experience, and depending on the activity I had, if it was an activity that wasn't as familiar, I would describe the responsibilities that I did in that activity, and if it was familiar, then I didn't really describe the responsibilities. And from there, at each activity, I sort of describe a short anecdote that showed the skill but didn't tell the skill. And then once I did that in a few sentences, probably two, maybe I would say around 2 to 3 sentences at most, since you don't have that much characters, then I would say whatever lesson I learned from that skill that I showed. And then from there, I would also show the impact of that experience as well. So what change or what impact they make when performing or doing an activity. And that was usually for the regular experiences. Now for the meaningful experience, there are many ways that you can approach it. You can approach it as a second part to that experience you had the first time, or you can show it a completely different experience that you had from that activity. But either way, you should still show the lesson you learned, and in that meaningful experience part, you should also show why that could help you as a physician in the future. And I did the same thing for the comas, but obviously there was no meaningful experience, so I didn't really bother that part. But essentially, you want to be able to describe your experiences using descriptive language again, and show the skill, but don't tell the skill. And then you want to show the lesson you learned and the impact it made in that activity. And if it's a meaningful experience, you want to be able to show them why you become a physician, and of course all the other things that include in your regular experiences on the AMCAS and the COMAS application. Alright, this next tip is a bit cliche, but it's still very vital in the primary application process, and is to basically fill everything correctly and check everything to make sure everything is as accurate as possible. Now remember I said that the verification period was around a month or so, right? So with the verification period being a month or so, you want to be able to check everything so that a AMCAS or even COMAS come back to you and say, oh, we need to fix this part of your transcript, or oh, this thing is wrong, can you check to make sure this is right? You don't want that at all, because that's required to take even more time, and you got even a larger or more verification process period than you had before. So you want to make sure you check everything right away. And that's not just for corrections or incorrect mistakes. This is also because once you submit that prime application, you cannot edit anything in part of the application except for adding schools. So this is basically, you know, your one-time opportunity to make sure everything in your prime application is good as possible. So you want to double check, triple check, quadruple check. I don't care how much time you check, but just make sure everything is as accurate as possible so that you don't have any errors that you can't re-edit, or you don't have to make those incorrect mistakes, or you have to edit those incorrect mistakes. And this goes especially for the transcript part, because sometimes with transcripts they might have weird ways of formatting it, and yes, you have to format the exact way that your official transcript shows it. So again, you want to be able to make sure you double check to make sure everything is filling as correctly as possible. The next tip that I have is about actually the process of applying the schools. So you want to be able to apply broadly, and what I mean by broadly is that you want to be able to apply to schools from across the nation. So East Coast, West Coast, you know, South, East, Midwest. You want to be able to apply broadly, and usually the average applicant applies to around 15 to 20 schools. And this is due to the application process becoming very competitive, especially in the past few years. And there's a stat that says that only 40% of applicants receive one acceptance, at least one acceptance. So that just shows you how competitive it is. That means that 60% of applicants don't even receive one acceptance at all. And with the application process, since it's become more competitive, that means that the average stats for some schools are even higher than before. And I would say not to apply to too top heavy schools. What I mean by that is usually that's like your top 20, top 30 schools that have very good stats or very high stats. It's okay to apply to a few of them, but don't make it half your list or 3/4 your list. It should be a few and keep it to minimum for the majority of applicants anyway. And usually you want to apply to undershoe schools, which is usually like, I want to say safety schools, because there's really no safety schools in middle school, but you know, schools that are below your median or below your stats basically. Then you want to have your target schools, which that should be the majority of your schools, and then have your reach schools, which should be only a few. Now, I think it's a great idea to consider aspect schools, but I will only apply it to aspect schools if you're truly interested in DO schools. Don't apply to DO schools and then if that's your only acceptance, you reject it. That's not good luck for you and that's not good luck for the school. So I also only apply to DO schools if you're genuinely interested in DO schools. Now with that being said, I recommend that you at least add a few DO schools if you like DO schools. If your stats are below 2.7 and below or below a 510. And the reason why is because again the application process is becoming more competitive and you want to make sure to secure one acceptance. That's also the goal. Secure one acceptance, right? So I would say if you have either a below 2% GPA or below a 510, you want to be able to apply to at least one DO school. I think it's always better to be too conservative than too ambitious, because at the very least you receive an acceptance rather than not receive acceptance and then wasting even more money to apply. Now another important thing is to apply to schools that fit to your narrative and that you could connect your narrative to the mission of the school. This is very important because schools want to be able to see that you could impact and contribute to their mission and their school and their communities around that school. So it's not only important to apply to schools that are within your range, but it's also important to apply to schools that you fit to their mission. And you can check this by obviously researching the school, researching the mission, perhaps research some of the activities or some of the student organizations they have, and you basically will be able to tell whether you should apply to the school or perhaps skip the school altogether. Alright, I would say my last tip is to try to pay attention to deadlines as much as you can. This is so important. It's not only important for your primaries, but it's also important for your secondaries and eventually your interviews. So what I would recommend is use a spreadsheet to keep track of all the schools you apply to. So your primaries, your secondaries, your interviews, all that stuff, so that you're on track to apply to every school on time. And I can look down below the spreadsheet I use so that you could use it as a reference, or you want to be able to see like how to organize schools when you're applying to medical school. I would also recommend using reminders as much as possible. Again, sometimes maybe you might feel too lazy to check the spreadsheet, so maybe having some reminders can help you keep on track. You know, you can use a planner, you can use your phone as a reminder, just anything that can help you to keep on track so that you're not missing out any important deadlines. Now again, with the AMCAS and the COMAS applications, they have slightly two different days to when you actually can start and start submitting applications. Now for both AMCAS and the COMAS, their application period starts in May, early May, where you can start filling your application. The difference is that a COMAS, which is a DO school, you can submit your application as soon as the actual application opens. So that means theoretically you can complete your entire application and submit it on the very first day the application opens. Now for AMCAS, which is the MD schools, your application opens in early May, but you can't submit anything until late May usually. So that's just a few differences to keep in mind, and hopefully from there, if you're applying to both MD and DO schools, you can sort of strategize when is the best time to submit to AMCAS, COMAS, or both application portals. Alright, with that being said, thank you guys so much for tuning to this channel. If you like this channel, please hit a like so I can reach out to multiple people. Perhaps subscribe if you wanted to see my upcoming videos, which is going to be mini series of my application process, as well as just sharing it across people so people can perhaps view it as well. Alright, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Take care.